Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you live online. If you'd like to support this channel, get additional bonus live streams, additional behind-the-scenes blog posts, and creative process work, you can support and subscribe to my Patreon channel. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you would like to read some of my comic books for free, you can go to news.jeremy.net. That will have the archive of my comic book Morning Stars, my newsletter archive, and I post pages on there. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comics, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will forward you to my Amazon author page where you can purchase physical copies of my books. So, let's see. Amaris is already in the chat. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for showing up here. We are continuing with my Creepy Wonderland series. It's Alice in Wonderland, characters from Alice in Wonderland drawn as Pennywise from It. And I've been working on this piece over the course of the past week. I finished penciling all of the piece, all the pieces. I see Iona in the chat, Iona Freeman. Thank you for joining us. Hi, how you doing? Before we get started, I'll just show you the pencils for them. See, I'm not sure if there'll be too much glare from the plastic frame that they're in, but these are all matted and on flat board. So this is the White Rabbit, and for those that are familiar with my creative process, you can see all of the red in there. That's on the other side of this. This is drawn on vellum, so I draw my rough sketches in red, then I flip it over. So basically like flipping your drawings in Photoshop, I do that on vellum. I make corrections on the flip side in graphite. So I've got the White Rabbit here. I've got the Queen of Hearts. And this is one of the pieces that I'll be inking today. Well, I'm going to start inking because I seriously doubt I'm going to finish this whole piece. It's pretty detailed. I've got the Mad Hatter. Then I've got an alternate version of the Queen of Hearts with her head kind of wide open and her mouth just opening and a glow coming out. And she's getting ready to swallow a heart. She's holding a little rain-splattered raincoat. It's, kind of if it's Pennywise, it's supposed to be like Georgie's heart from It. There's the Dark Tower in the background. And then the first one that I finished, and I've already shared the process of that on there with the Cheshire Cat. So all these, they're drawn on 8.5 by 11. They're matted to 11 by 14, and I believe the Cheshire Cat one is already on for sale on my website on jeremy.net. I'm going to put the rest of this series on not long after the video, and I'll have a link to those in the chat if anybody is a collector of original art and wants to purchase those. So eventually, I'm going to have all of these inked, and then I'm going to color them in Photoshop. The original ink drawings will be available for sale, and then I'm going to make prints of the colored versions. So, and let's see here. Iona says that she likes the Mad Hatter. Thank you very much. You know, I tried to put a lot of love and care into all of them and give them all compelling, interesting looks while making them all feel a little bit different and unique. So, on to inking. Hang on, I gotta get my bottle of water somewhere. For some reason, whenever I do live streams, I think it's because I tend to sleep in late on Sundays. But my voice is always really gravelly when I start. I know it doesn't sound like that because I don't have a particularly deep voice, but it's gravelly for me. So I have to drink a little bit of water as I'm getting started. All right, so I've got a little inkwell by my drawing table. I'm using a bottle of Doc Martens Bombay Black India ink. So I'm just gonna take about 10 drops of that. Actually, before I fill up my inkwell, go ahead, I'll go ahead and do it now. Usually when I start a piece, the first thing I like to do is I like to get a ruler and I like to draw out all of the straight edges. Sorry, counting drops. I like to draw out all of the straight edge objects because honestly that's not a particularly exciting part of the process for me, so I like to get it out of the way up front. So let me grab my ruler and just draw in the basic bounding boxes of the building before we get started. I'm curious how well the Mad Hatter actually shows up on camera, because when I first printed these out, I realized that I printed out the Queen of Hearts a little bit too dark. What I usually do is I take my the pencils that I showed you at the start, I'll scan those in, and since when they're scanned in, they're the mirrored image because it's on the back side of the Bristol, I flip it back over in Photoshop, convert it to a light blue, and then print it to Bristol board to ink. And this is about how light I usually like to have it, so it's really faint, and once the ink is on there, people aren't even going to notice it because it's not like I can go back in and erase it. This one I printed out a little bit darker, and I think it's fine. But I was a little bit bothered in the fact that I was like, well, on one hand, people watch me ink it are going to be able to see the underdrawing better. On the other hand, this one's going to give me a better result. So I think in the future, the ones that I print out are going to be much lighter. That said, let me move the Mad Hatter out of the way to avoid any possible ink disasters. You never know when working. Let's see. Amara said that she got her flu shot 2 weeks ago and now has the flu. You know, I'm sorry to hear that. That happens to my wife a lot. Whenever we try to go get our flu shot every year, and actually we were probably due to get it now. We meant to get it 2 weeks ago and just didn't have time. We were going to talk about getting it done today, but she's a little bit under the weather. And anytime she gets the flu shot, she definitely gets sick. So we want to make sure she's as healthy as possible. And it sounds like it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because it's like if you don't get the flu shot, you get the flu. You get the flu shot, sometimes people get the flu. So, I mean, that sucks. But, you know, hopefully you can just be at home and rest up, drink plenty of fluids. But I am sorry to hear that. So while I ink my comics in general with a brush, I tend to do any buildings or vehicles or anything that's mechanical with a micron or a technical pen. I mean, any technical pen, but my microns are my weapon of choice, the Sakura microns. I usually will use anything from an 01 to an 08. 05 tends to be my standard go-to, but then for like really small details, I'll go to an 02 or an 01. Then I'll have like an 08 if I have to particularly put a beefier line around something. Let's see here. Oh, Iona Freeman says, by the way, as you guys, for those that are new to the channel, I try to keep an eye on the chat. Every once in a while when I start drawing, I'll get into a jag and be talking about something. So I always come back every like 5 or 10 minutes and check the chat more often if there's a lot of comments. So if I don't respond right away, I will try to get to it, and you can just say, hey, what about this? What about that? So Iona Freeman asks, do you have any tips on comic art? Well, that's a really broad the process of creating comics involves a lot. Do you have a more specific question about inking, about penciling, about any particular phase? Because my comics, I published them in black and white, so I'm not necessarily great for advice on coloring. But for the rest of the process, I do my own lettering, my own inking, penciling, and I am more than happy to give tips on any particular area. But comic creation as a whole is a pretty broad field. So if there's something specific, please feel free to ask. Let's see here. Amara says the flu shot is supposed to help you survive the flu, because there's a lot of people who die from it, which is true. Yeah, you know, it's one of those unfortunate things where sometimes the cure can be as bad as the disease. Oh, hey! Iron Rocks is in the chat. says he's here. He just has to transfer to the car. Thanks for joining us. We are inking the Queen of Hearts from my Wonderland series. And I know that this is quite a bit of a departure from working on Morningstar. But every once in a while, you get an idea for a series or a project, and you get a strong sense of immediacy. You really feel like, anytime you come up with an idea, there's that honeymoon phase with the idea where you're in love with it, you're super excited. Then the longer you go before starting it, the more the idea sits around, it becomes a little bit more of, it's going to require this much work. I have to do these things. Other stuff comes up and gets in the way. Maybe you come up with even better, new, sexy, fun ideas, and you don't necessarily get around to doing it. Sometimes ideas just sit and linger. This was something that, I think the dream was inspired by the fact that I had seen, my wife and I went to see It Chapter 2 not too long ago, and then just having a really visceral nightmare that was inspired by that. It felt urgent. Like, I want to make this piece or this set of pieces, and I want to make them right now. And so I just decided Morningstar is going to take several months to finish. And for those who are new, Morningstar is my comic book. It's Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It is an 8-issue series, and I am working on the 8th and final issue. So this is a little detour from that, but that's kind of the beauty of self-publishing, is that if something really captures me and I want to take an aside and do a little side project, I can. So it's not like this project is going to be a whole nother comic book series. It's going to derail me working on Morningstar. It's 8. It's like as if I decided I was going to do 8 comic book covers. Because that's really what it is. It's like it's 5. Pardon me, 5. I did 5 images, pencil them, ink them, gonna color them digitally. And so, it's, a short detour, but it's something that I'm passionate about, I'm excited about, and I like the idea of doing something where it's not as much planning as doing a full comic book series is. But being able to do something a little bit on the side. I see Edwin Boyette's in the chat. Thank you for stopping by, Edwin. Wonderland itself is not a comic. I was saying my current comic is self-published, and it's Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western, and that's Morningstar. This series is it's a series of art prints that I'm going to do, and I'm going to sell them at conventions, through my website. I may do a limited edition version on Kickstarter and do like a Kickstarter campaign for a larger, maybe hand-embellished short run. But I have yet to dive into running a Kickstarter campaign, mainly because I barely have time to finish the work that I have now. And I study Kickstarter very closely. I study the campaigns. I believe you've run some successful campaigns, 'cause I think I've seen your name in some on some other creators' posts. But I have respect for how much work running a Kickstarter is, and knowing that I barely have time to actually get stuff written and drawn right now, I'm hesitant to jump into running a campaign if I don't have time to run it properly. So for now, these are going to be prints, just, the regular, I'm probably going to do them in 8x12 prints. And they'll be on sale on my website and at comic conventions. But I may do, like, the limited edition ones will probably be 18x24. And that will be when I have time to run a proper campaign, which, again, I need to finish the Western that I'm working on, and before I dive into anything else. So, if anything, these prints are just a small break, a little vacation from my my main project, which is Morningstar. So, so Iona asking about tips for comic art. So you're saying, like, where would you start as a beginner in comic art? Well, as a beginner, I would say the main thing would probably be finding some scripts to practice from. If you do a search for, I believe it's called the Comic Book Script Database. If you just do a search for, if you just Google comic book scripts, you can find the page. And I'm not 100% sure if it's Complex. I think it might be Complex Script Archive. But anyway, it's a bunch of book scripts that a variety of professional creators, people have worked for Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, have posted their scripts there specifically so that people that are studying the craft of comic creation, comic book writing, can read a script. For writers, it's great to study from. For artists, it's great to use those scripts as practice to draw your own pages. And it's probably better to draw a comic book that you haven't read, only so that you can come in fresh and not be influenced by the storytelling decisions that another creator has done. Maybe reading a book that you're familiar with the characters, like a Spider-Man script or a Batman script, but maybe not an issue that you've done, so you already know how it's laid out. And then I would say just practice breaking down pages, laying down pages, your page composition, and do short projects. 4-page, 8-page, 12-page stories. Do short things, because biting off, even drawing an entire 22-page or 20, my comics are 24 pages, even biting off an entire comic book issue can be really daunting the first time you do it. And the idea is that you do these short pages, you build up your chops in terms of comic book storytelling, page layout, and you kind of practice. And eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, I feel confident in this. I feel confident in practicing my drawing chops. That's the other thing is, I don't know if you have figure drawing classes available to you nearby, but I take figure drawing classes regularly. And I feel that they are very, very important in terms of me continuing to grow and study my craft. I don't look at myself as, oh, I am a fully formed artist. I still go to classes once a week. I read art books on the actual craft of illustration. I do master studies. I'm constantly working on learning to grow and improve my craft. And I think that, it's a good attitude to have throughout your entire career. Like, no matter how much time you spend making art, to always keep one eye towards improving your craft, growing and learning. But I would say, yeah, get some scripts, practice drawing them, continue to always work on anatomy. You're going to need to learn perspective, definitely. Perspective is very important in comics because you don't want to just have characters floating in space. You need to have them in environments. And in order to create environments, you need perspective, so that way you can have characters relatively in proportion to each other and feel like they actually belong in their environment. For example, where are my little figures here? And I will come back to other comments in the chat. But this is a good question, so I figured let me go a little deeper in it. So, I don't know what happened to this figure's head, but so let's say you've got a character and they're, I don't know, getting ready to jump, fight, they're crouched down. When you've got these characters that you're drawing, even if you have really good figure drawing skills, if you have this character drawn like this, but the ground plane and the environment is at a different angle. Like, let's say you've got the character kind of coming straight forward, but you've got a ground plane and you've got one building that's tilted this way, one building that's tilted the other way, or forward and back. Then you're gonna have all these inconsistencies. The environment isn't going to feel like an actual environment. You want the direction that's up, like your y-axis, your x-axis. If you're talking about like 3D programs, your front, your back, your left, and your side. You want them all to feel consistent with the figure. You want them all to feel like they're existing in the same world, and that's where perspective comes in. So, practice scripts, practice storytelling, practice figure drawing and anatomy. If you can go to a figure drawing workshop nearby, it doesn't have to be a full-on expensive class. It could just be like a thing where you just sit in with a model. Like, there might be a group of people, and usually those kinds of things are like $20, anywhere from 10 to 20 bucks a session. And you just sit in and study the figure. But studying storytelling, figure drawing, practicing from scripts, and then studying perspective, getting some good books on perspective. And I think I have a list of some books that I recommend. If you just search for books in my YouTube channel, I've got some book recommendations there, including recommendations specifically on perspective books. So let's see what else is going on in the chat here. Okay. So Edwin says campaigns are definitely a good bit of work. We're talking about Kickstarter campaigns. I promote them. I stream with Mike S. Miller and run a weekly art competition with him. We still see 25-year artists learning and sharing techniques. Yeah, I've probably been drawing because I'm in my 40s. I've probably been drawing. Well, I've been drawing since I was in high school, and I was in a an indie comic book studio, a small comic book studio, back when I was in high school. But even after high school and college in a fine art program, I think I'd probably been drawing for a good 10 or 15 years before I realized, wow, I really don't know how to draw. And that was when I started getting into taking figure drawing classes regularly. And I would say since then, the studying part of my work has become a significant. Hang on, this thing's not giving me much of a flow here. Need a little scrap paper to get some marks going. This is weird. For those who can't see. But yeah, continuing to study, continuing to learn and grow is just, it's a permanent part of my lifestyle now. Like I take figure drawing classes once a week, and I plan to take them until the day I die, because I find that that particular aspect is not something that it's a skill to be learned, it's a muscle to be exercised. And that's what I tell people all the time. The more you do it, the stronger you get, the less you do it, the weaker you get. But there's never a point where you're done, where you just know everything. So you're always working, always improving. There we go. So I was just, when I first started putting my brush down, I wasn't getting the flow of ink off of it that I normally get. And that is weird, because it's one thing to have a physical pen and maybe it's clogged or it's running low on ink, but with brushes, it is odd sometimes when you sit down to make marks and it just does not do what you expect or want it to. So before I got in here, I wanted to get that going. And also, I haven't been doing much traditional inking lately because I've been doing a lot of rewriting, lettering, and penciling. So also getting my hand back into the habit of making nice, long, smooth strokes. It takes a bit of work. So the first thing that I try to start with, and this is something that my buddy Carl Altstetter taught me, was a holding line. And it's an outline that's a little bit thicker than the entire, than all of the detailed lines that are going to be inside the figure. But the point is, it helps give you a strong silhouette of the character. That's really what I'm doing, is I'm going to start by outlining the silhouette of the whole figure. And it's slightly thicker to help separate the figure from the environment. But it makes like a nice, bold graphic statement to kind of encase the character like this. And for me, the inking really is the drawing, because I pencil pretty loosely. I mean, it depends on who you look at. Some people would say that my pencils are pretty tight, but when you compare to somebody like, say, like a Philip Tan or like Jim Lee, you look at theirs and they're super crisp, super tight. And my stuff, I think, feels very, very loose and, like, you know, loose isn't a bad thing. Like, I'll get somebody like Francesco Francavilla, and his stuff is very loose, very organic. His line weight just kind of flows, but it doesn't feel labored. And I think that that's something that's very beautiful. I think for me, the problem is when I'm that loose, I don't get that nice organic feel that he has. It just feels like I'm not trying very hard in the bad sense. Whereas Francesco Francavilla's work feels like it's effortless. Like he's not trying, it's just beautiful lines coming out. So let's see here. Back to the chat. Let's see here. Oh, Peter Palmiotti's in the chat. Hey, Peter, thank you for stopping by. Always good to see you, man. So, Iona says, thank you for the information. And by the way, for the most part, my whole live stream is just me working on projects, just working on whatever I would be drawing anyway, and talking to people. So if you have more questions, don't feel like, oh, you asked your one question and now you're done. If that one question leads to another, or you think of other stuff while we're on here, please feel free to hop in and ask more questions. Edwin says, more structured learning, focused practice can level up an artist faster than just doodling without a plan. Very true. Agreed completely. That type of learning develops your economy of action, meaning you can create more art in the time you have available to you. These are some great comments, Edwin. I need to come over and watch your chat more, your live stream. Some of it depends on if you're inking yourself or handing it off to someone else, and that partnership. Kenan White has some beautiful pencil work. And, Art from Amar is on the chat. He says, what's going on with you today? Wrapping up the Stephen King inspired drawings? Yes, very much so. I've got all of them penciled. And by the way, those are some great comments, Edwin. Thank you. Yeah, I've got the whole series penciled now, and it's just a matter of sitting down and inking them, which, again, that is my my favorite phase of the creative process. So, although what's interesting is I recently got an iPad Pro, and now that I've got that, I think for comics work, I'm very seriously considering going full digital, penciling and inking for comics. It seems a shame, though, because it took me probably, I think, a good 5 years to really get happy with my inking work. Like the most recent 5 years. Before that, I never really liked my inking at all. It was just horrible. But in terms of inking with a brush, it's only, I think, in the past 5 years that I've started to develop a bit of facility with it. And it seems like it'd be a shame to put all that time into learning how to ink with a brush and then give it up. What I might do is kind of split the difference and do my comic book work digitally and then do standalone illustrations traditionally, so that, you know, I've still got originals to sell and to stay in the practice of it. It's pretty hard to say for sure what I'm going to do, because a lot of times I may sit down and have a logical idea of, well, this is what makes sense for me workflow wise. This should be my next productive step. But while I like to think that I'm not ruled by my emotions, sometimes I sit down, I start doing something, I'm like, you know what, this just doesn't feel right to me. I really want to do something else. I really want to keep, like, I know for myself, I want to keep working traditionally. But just sketching with the Apple Pencil, I could see and feel the difference in terms of how much faster my layout phase will go. So at first I was like, well, maybe I'll just do my my pencils and layouts digitally and still print them to Bristol board and ink them traditionally. And then I did an ink drawing with the Apple Pencil, and I was like, wow, this feels good. So I am not 100% sure what I'm going to do yet. Don't know what the future holds. Oh, and speaking of not knowing what the future holds, after I do finish Morningstar, my plan was to do a sequel to my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. And I have been batting that story around, and I've been blogging about this and talking about it on my Patreon posts, that I've been struggling with the writing side for that sequel. And I have characters, I've got events that happen, I've got, you know, a semi-structure of a plot, but what I don't have is a story, in the sense of a narrative, a compelling narrative arc. And when I say that, what I mean is that I could make it. I have all the ingredients to make a comic book, but not necessarily the ingredients to make a comic book that I care about. There's an expression that I've heard in a lot of business podcasts where they talk about when it comes to decision making and having to sacrifice and start saying no to certain projects and yes to say what you say yes and no to. And the expression that I've heard people say is that if it's not a hell yeah, it's a no. Just meaning if you're not super excited about it, your time is too valuable. You should really only spend it on the things you really genuinely want to do. And when it comes down to it, all of the marketing information and advice that I've listened to about publishing and books is the best way to build a career as an author is by doing a series. Maybe it's a trilogy, maybe it's 5, 6 books, whatever. But creating a character that you like, that you can tell compelling stories with, building an audience, doing that series. And then, once you get to the point where you've got a steady readership and you're selling books regularly, then you can look into starting a new series, doing something new with characters, experimenting with different genres, but definitely to stay within the same genre, if not the same actual character and character world. That said, that's not how my brain writes stories. My brain just simply thinks of, like, the story kind of falls out of my head fully formed, and it's not really necessarily concerned with the same genre. I mean, my first book was a psychological thriller. Eye of the Gods is sort of a Western supernatural fantasy. But yeah, I think of stories in all different genres. And right now, the story that I had planned for Eye of the Gods, I just looked at it and I was like, I could make this as a comic, but would I really enjoy drawing it? Is it something that I'm dying to do? Like, really what it comes down to is if I didn't tell this story, would it bother me? Like, Morningstar was something that was, if I only tell one comic book story, this is the story I want to tell. Now that I'm almost done telling it, I feel like, well, the next project I want to do, I don't want to just do comics like, all right, well, everything else is just leftover. I want to make sure that the next book I do, I feel as excited and passionate about. So I think I am going to put the sequel to Eye of the Gods on the shelf. Doesn't mean I'm never going to do a sequel to it. What it means is I'm going to move on to some other stories that I'm more excited about. And I'm going to come back and keep batting that story, or the Eye of the Gods sequel, around. Every few months I'll come in, work on it, and I'll just keep batting it around until I work it into something that I am excited about. And in the meantime, I'm gonna, move on to some stories that make me feel excited as this Wonderland series does. So let me swing back to the chat here. Lots of comments filled up here. All right, so oh yeah. Art with Amar. Amar says, I'm familiar with Kanan. He says he uses Clip Studio as well for his digital work. And it's funny. I was asking some other friends of mine whether I should get Clip Studio for the iPad. And for the most part, I've been using Procreate. And I've been using Procreate since before I had an iPad Pro, just on my regular iPad. And I really love that. I downloaded a sketchbook, and I'll mess around with it. But so far, Procreate really feels like it's got everything that I need in terms of making comics digitally. I'll probably still do lettering on a desktop machine. I could look into getting Affinity Designer for the iPad. They've got a Designer and Affinity Photo for iPad as well. But I think really it may just be, when it comes to digitally, it'll just be the drawing aspects. Pencils, layouts, thumbnails, and inking. So for now, Procreate seems to be the big go-to. So let's see. Ian Rock says, wife forgot her phone. She took mine. I'm back on the iPad. Well, you know what? Hey, at least you got something. First world problems. Edwin says, going out for a run, but good to catch your work. Hit me up when you have time, if the time matches up. Might be fun to have you stop by Drawn and Quartered with us one Wednesday. Thank you for extending the invite. Have a good day, and thanks for hanging out. Let's see. I see Clay is in the chat. Hey, Clay, how you doing, man? Let's see. Amar says the people on Drawn and Quartered crew can get pretty political. He says, as an artist, I try to stay apolitical and not affiliate myself with any groups. I try to stay away from the isms, politics, and religion. Ion Rock says, this is my second attempt at writing about an awakened human. The first attempt was completely boring. I assume we're talking about your comic now, Ion. It said, in this attempt, I'm adding monsters, as in a monster outbreak. And Clay asks, what am I drawing? What I am drawing is a very creepy version of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. I'm drawing the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, except I'm drawing her as the clown Pennywise from the movie It. I had a nightmare after seeing the most recent It movie. And it stuck with me, and it gave me an idea for a painting. And I think that's actually the nice thing about being an artist, is that normally people have nightmares and they're scared and they just want to forget them. But working as somebody who does, who makes pictures and does a creative work, I can take something that would normally be scary and upsetting and say, how can I turn this around into something positive? And in this case, it's getting an idea for a series of pieces. So I did, or I'm drawing rather, the White Queen, the Cheshire Cat, or not the White Queen, the Queen of Hearts, the Cheshire Cat, the White Rabbit, and the Mad Hatter. And I'm doing them all as this creepy clown from the movie It. So I'm calling it my Creepy Wonderland series. Let's see here. What's funny is normally the way I try to work is I just sort of slide my way around the outline of a figure, but the fact that these lines are going in and out, when I'm penciling, it goes very smoothly, but with inking, I'm constantly moving this thing around, rotating it to get the different angles that I'm used to drawing from. But yeah, giving her this big, fluffy collar, and she's holding a heart that she took a bite out of from the little boy in the movie It. So this is a, it's a creepy piece, but that's where my my ideas and creative tendencies tend to go, is sort of the strange, creepy, unusual stuff. See here. Oh, a few more comments in the chat. Chat ran away from me a little bit while I was sitting here drawing this collar. So let's see here. Amar says, I had a hilarious idea for a horror movie that I was chatting with a friend about yesterday. Edwin says, shared the stream on Twitter. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Said Dee Dee Willingham is very complimentary to you. She's awesome. Yeah, I love Dee Dee's work. Peter also chimed in. Yeah, Dee Dee is awesome. So yeah, thank you, Edwin. Thanks so much for stopping by and for sharing the stream. Let's see here. Amar says, I use Procreate, but Clip is still better for me, but people like what they like. And let's see. Ion Rock says astounding even, which I think that he was talking about the monsters and the story that he's all right, I'm not sure if you're talking about Clip Studio Paint or about, oh yeah, Procreate is awesome, astounding even. Yes, yeah, I agree. Like, I fell in love with Procreate as soon as I started using it. It reminded me of the old version of Painter Classic that used to come with any Wacom tablet you bought. It had every tool that you needed, and the tools worked very simply and felt very close to traditional. So, Ayana asks if I have any tips on drawing figures. And I'm going to go through and read the other comments in the chat first, because that question is going to be a long answer. I'm going to be talking for like 5 or 10 minutes while I'm drawing. So, Amar says, I use Procreate for one-offs. You can also use it to do quick animations. And he says, wow, real life scares me more than horror movies, but I do love horror movies. They're more funny for me than anything else. Documentaries scare me more from the movie aspect because they're taken from real life. The recent horror comedy idea I had was in the tradition of horror B movies, like The Blob and The Stuff. Oh man, it's called Fecal. Yes, that sounds super gross and super strange. Um, Clay asks what colors I'm going to use on this piece, and I'm gonna take each. I'm gonna lay out all four of them digitally, and I'll share a process of that on my blog. I'm basically gonna color all of them kind of at the same time, loosely, to figure out. I'm not sure what the color scheme is gonna be yet. I mean, it's gonna have pale clown skin and like a red nose, but other than that, each one is gonna be kind of a different color scheme. So a lot of times, color studies are how I figure out what I'm gonna do color-wise. It's not like I go into this knowing right off the top of my head, or a lot of times if I have a color scheme in my head, I find that when I start doing thumbnails and studies or coloring the actual piece, that there's things about that I have to change. So I try not to get too married to whatever colors I'm planning to do. I try to let it kind of be free flow and figure it out. Amar also says he has Painter 2019 as well. So, but back to Iona's question about tips on figure drawing. Well, again, the most important thing, I think, is getting in front of a model and studying from live humans. In the meantime, if you're not able to do that, there is a great YouTube channel called the Crocus Cafe. I believe it's Croquis. And what they do is they have figure drawing models that pose, and they're just showing photos of those poses on YouTube, but they have them timed. So, you know, most figure drawing classes, you'll either be doing 10-minute studies, 5-minute studies, 15-minute studies, whatever. But they're timed poses because models can't hold those poses forever. It's really, really hard. And this YouTube channel basically mimics that sense of time and timed poses. So they'll just go through, you draw from a model for 5 minutes or however long they're doing that pose, and when it's done, they move on to another one. I would also say that it's probably worth it to get a couple of drawing books on drawing the figure. I recommend Figure Drawing for All It's Worth by Andrew Loomis. That's one of my favorites. And I'm actually doing, on my Patreon, I'm doing an art study group where I'm picking an art book and I'm actually doing studies from it and just explaining how I practice and work on continuing to learn as an artist. And right now I'm using a book called Walt Reads the Figure. There's an old thing called the Famous Artist Drawing Course, and it was a male correspondence course for learning how to draw. And they would send you some pamphlets with different lessons, and then you would actually do the assignments and mail them in, and they would get critiqued by artists. And Walt Reed is a classic old-time illustrator, and he was also one of the instructors from the Famous Artist School. In fact, I can probably show you a couple of these books. But really, when it comes down to learning how to draw the figure, you want to start with gesture drawings to try and get the flow of what the figure's doing and capture the energy. Then you want to draw basic cylinders to kind of give it a sense of structure and volume, whether it's cubes, cylinders, squares. Walt Reed's book goes into that a lot. Let's see here. I have a big bookcase right by my drawing table. In fact, let me slide the queen over a little bit, raise up the screen. Like I said, we were going to get into it. I knew when Iona asked that question that's a question with a long answer in terms of improving figure drawing. But yeah, Walt Reads the Figure. Even on the cover, you can see here, there's not a gesture drawing, but doing the figure in these basic primitive shapes, cylinders, cubes, squares for the hand, learning how to do a gesture drawing, and then draw these simple forms on top of that, and then draw the physical body. To be honest, if you're just starting figure drawing, I wouldn't even get too caught up in learning anatomy per se, in terms of learning all the muscles, the pec muscles, the biceps, the deltoids. You will need to know those things, but if you're too focused on those things in the beginning, what you're going to end up with is a very, very lumpy drawing where you're just drawing muscles on top of shapes because you don't necessarily understand how those shapes really attach to the form and you don't understand the structure yet. Honestly, this phase right here in the middle, where it's kind of a simple mannequin, those are probably, I would say, the most important thing for beginners to focus on. And this whole book goes through, like, in every phase, even though they get deeper into anatomy. Like, they've got skeletons here, they name all the major bones, lots of skeleton drawing. They get into, like, the eyes, but let me see, where's the page that has? These are a lot of heads, hands, all very, very important. I'm trying to see if there's a page in here where it gets into... Yeah, so they go over muscles as well. All of this stuff, if you're just learning figure drawing, is gonna slow you down at first. This stuff is maybe after you've been doing it for a few months and you're like, I want these things to feel more realistic. I want to see more muscles. In the beginning, the early part of this book, it's all primitive shapes. A lot of cubes, a lot of cylinders. He uses glasses, like actual cups, like a clear glass to describe these forms. This book I would actually recommend. That's the thing I'd say. If you're going to start, get this book, and I'll put a link to it in the chat. I have like affiliate links, so I get a little bonus if you order through the link that I post on there. But I'll put a link to Amazon for this book in the description, not the chat, in the description of the video after it's over. But get this book and try to find a place where you can actually go and draw from human figures, from life. And if you can't, then get friends to pose for you, get family to pose for you. Maybe go to the mall and draw people. I mean, it's really better to go someplace where people are sitting and not moving. If there's a museum nearby in your city and that museum has Greek statues, like classical sculpture, to go and draw from Greek sculpture, that's actually a great thing that I don't do enough and that I used to do, is actually go and I live near the Getty Center in Los Angeles, so I would go to the Getty Center and draw from statues there. The other book that I recommend, The Figure, is definitely, I'd say, the best book I've seen for beginners. Figure Drawing for All It's Worth is also a great book, but this goes into illustration in general. And it covers, I'd say a slightly wider variety of topics as opposed to just the figure. Like, a lot of this gets into picture making as well, which would be good as somebody who's interested in comics, because, well, you know what though? This book has that The Figure doesn't have. This book, The Figure. This book gets into gesture a bit more. So it gets into gesture and more into illustration and lighting. Both of these are really great books. These are the go-to books I recommend whenever people ask me about books for drawing. So hopefully that answers that question. And if you have more, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to lay it in there. I was rambling for a bit, so let me swing back to the chat and see what's going on. Let's see here. Oh, I see Avante in the chat. Sorry I didn't get to you. I was on a long ramble answering a question, but hopefully you're still there. This piece is it's the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, but she's drawn as Pennywise from It. And it's a long story, and I've mentioned it in previous live streams. So basically I had a nightmare with Pennywise from It, the clown. And when I woke up, my cat was sitting on my chest and just sort of looked over me and meowed. And when she did that, I imagined her, our cat, as like turning and just having Pennywise's head on her cat body, and it was just super creepy. Like one of those things where you imagine weird things when you're still kind of half awake, half asleep. And immediately after that, instead of being really freaked out, I had the idea to do a piece of Pennywise as the Cheshire Cat. So I drew that piece, and it gave me the idea to just do an Alice in Wonderland themed series of pieces, but to kind of put in a whole bunch of Stephen King elements. So, like, it's the Queen of Hearts with kind of like Pennywise type clown makeup, but she's holding Georgie's raincoat covered in blood, and she's standing in a field of flowers, and behind is the Dark Tower. So I'm like working on all these little Stephen King themed elements. So it's not necessarily just about Pennywise. It's about Stephen King in general, because I won't say I've read every Stephen King novel, but I've probably read maybe about a third of his novels and short stories, which, considering how many books he's written, that's a lot of books. I probably read like between 20 and 30 Stephen King books. I showed these real quick at the top of the live stream, but you know, I've got, these are the pencil drawings, not the finished inks, but you know, the Cheshire Cat one, there's like balloons floating in the background. You know, for the White Rabbit, he's standing in a cornfield, and you know, for kind of like implying Children of the Corn. And then behind him in the field is the He Who Walks Behind Rose, the you know, the monster, the demon from Children of the Corn. This is an alternate version of the same piece. Oh no, this is the pencils for this piece, and it's reflected because it's I draw them on vellum, and then I flip them the way you would flip a drawing in the mirror or flip it in Photoshop, and I make corrections on the vellum because it's transparent. I can see through. So when I'm done, I flip it back for inking. There's the Mad Hatter, and with the Mad Hatter, he's got Georgie's boat floating in his cup, in his teacup. It's gonna be all black in there. It's gonna be like floating in a you know, I'm trying to decide. I don't know whether I'm going to fill this with black or whether I'm going to leave it like this and then fill it with red in the colored piece. The point is, and this one looks the most like Pennywise because I think, you know, the Mad Hatter kind of has that look in the face. And the little Stephen King nod, this is written backwards so you can't read it because it's, you know, the flipped image. But it says, in this style, and the original Mad Hatter illustration, it says in this style, and it gives the hat size. And what I have is that it says in this style, it's 217. And the reason why it has that number is because in The Shining, its room, I think it's 230, it's either 237, I can't remember the name of it, but the room number that Danny isn't supposed to go into. And in the books, it's 217, and the hotel asked Stanley Kubrick to change the number to a room number that the hotel does not have, because he'd said that they were afraid no one would ever want to stay in that room again if they had that number. So I wanted to use the number from the actual Stephen King novel as opposed to the movie, even though I love the movie. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Devante. Let me see what's going on with the chat, and then let me get me back here and keep drawing, because we are already at 11:50. The time goes by so fast. So I'm usually only on here for an hour. We'll wrap it up right about at noon. Let's see here. Let's see here. And let's see. Amar says there are a few sites I can share where you can do the same until you can get a live class. This is going back to Iona's question about studying. He says there's nudity on the channel, so hopefully that's not an issue. He mentions Loomis and Bridgman. Yes, very much so. Walt Reed. He says, is that the same one that was on the back of periodicals in the 70s and 80s? And yes, it is. He says it was a drawing exercise you would send off. Yeah, it was a drawing exercise you would send off, right? Yeah, I never actually sent away for those, but I would like to get them. I know that there are collections and they're kind of expensive. We can get the original binders of the famous artist courses and get their drawing lessons. He also says that gesture drawing helps with the flow, with line flow, and learning shapes helps with dimension. Agreed, and agreed. Iron Rock says simple, happy face. And Amar says capture the gesture line and basic shapes are key. The anatomy and construction will get really technical. Iron Rock says basic comic art, right up my alley. Good. You know, keep it simple. No need to get complex. So Amar says, "Are you back on the affiliate links? That's great." Yes, although honestly, not enough people are buying through them because there's a certain threshold you have to meet to keep the affiliate count. So people are buying from them, but not enough. So if they end up shutting down the affiliate account, then so be it. I tried it. I put it out there. If people want, I don't want people to buy stuff just to buy stuff. I want people to, if I recommend something and it's useful to them, then I'm happy to get rewarded for that. I appreciate the contribution to the channel in that way. But if people aren't buying from them, so be it. Amar says you can use people on the bus, coffee shop, or parks. Certain animation books can be helpful as well with learning to draw the figure. And he says Queen of Hearts is a song from the 80s. Hey, Des LaSalle is in the chat. Thanks for stopping by, Del. He says Michael Matisse's book called Force. It's a pretty good one for Gesture 2. I'm halfway through it now. I very much want to read that book. I have forced myself to stop buying so many art books only because I buy them and then I put them on my shelf and then I never get around to opening them. And I've realized I need to start using these books and studying from them. So, Michael Matisse's book, Force, is definitely on my list of ones. Once I get through a bunch of books, I do want to pick up his book because it looks fantastic for everything I've seen. He says, Amar also says that he's got an online school as well. Back to Procreate, Iron Rock says, Procreate has a feature where you can record all of your work and it plays it back from beginning to end. Can you post some of your work with Procreate like that? And yes, I will. As I get into doing some comics work, I will start posting those. Amar said to Iron Rocks, I did 2 October Inktober posts using the time-lapse feature. This is Iron Rocks says, cool. Peter Palmiotti has to go, but thank you again for hanging out. Always love it when I get a chance to see you online and spend a little time with you. So thanks for stopping by. It was good to see you. All right, let me get in here and just draw a little bit more before we're wrapped up. So the challenge here is, do I want to go in and start detailing line work or do I want to start spotting blacks? And there aren't a lot of heavy blacks in this, mainly because I want to leave it open for line work. But I do kind of want to draw, I don't know why, I'm looking at the hair at the top of the White Queen, and I kind of want to finish that off. So let me get in here and at least draw her hair. Like I said, I didn't think I was going to be able to get a whole lot of inking done in one session. But I enjoy sharing this process with you guys, so I'm gonna come in, ink what I can, and try and smooth that line out so that this feels a little bit more continuous. And I'm certainly not afraid, if I mess up, of going in here with some whiteout and just inking over sections if they do not come together well. Let's see here. You know, this is something I wonder about, is whether you guys would prefer me, because I try to be pretty attentive to the chat and paying attention and talking, but I also wonder whether you guys would prefer me doing less talking and more drawing, because, you know, when people get asked good questions, I like to take my time and dive into it, but also there's a lot of times where I'm sitting here and, you know, just simply talking like I am now and answering a question that, you know, answers about like what books I can recommend. if I wasn't actually grabbing a book to show you, then I could probably answer that question without really looking up and stopping drawing. Maybe that's what I need to do, is get better at being able to discuss these things without breaking my actual drawing flow, and keep the drawing side going as I answer questions and discuss things. The tricky part is when I'm drawing something and I actually have to pay attention to what I'm drawing. Like when I'm drawing something that's a little bit challenging, or I have to say, oh wait, I need to make sure that I adjust the tones here, modulating things. The side of your brain that says, this isn't working out well, this needs to be adjusted, this is, it's not necessarily negative, or you just saying mean things or saying, oh, my drawings suck. It's the part of your mind that helps you improve and fix and adjust things. And I guess being able to pay attention to that part of your brain, that part of your brain is always on, but sometimes when I'm drawing, if I'm drawing and I'm talking, I may not be as tapped into that self-analysis side of my brain, and therefore might draw things that aren't looking as good as they could be. Of course, also when I'm talking, maybe I'm less inhibited. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's always a challenge. But you know what? If I wanted easy, I wouldn't be making comics. Okay. So, a few last questions in the chat here, and then we will wrap it up for the day. So, Amar says that he also did a self-portrait time-lapse as well. It was really quick for International Self-Portrait Day on November 1st. I've never participated in that. I probably should. Generally speaking, I ignore a lot of art challenges, not because I don't like them, but simply because I'm so busy with the other things I'm working on that I don't have time to really set my work aside to participate. But, it would be nice to do some more in the future. Amar says inking can be really slow unless you start by drawing directly in ink. Ian Rock says he's got to go. Great stream. Thank you so much, and thanks for stopping by and hanging out. Iona Freeman asks, when did you start comic art or start drawing in general? I've been drawing, and I've been drawing comics since I was in high school. So at this point, a good 20 plus years. Honestly, yeah, I've been drawing since I was a little kid. I've always loved drawing. I wouldn't say that my work came anywhere near professional level when I was in high school, even though I was in a studio. I just happened to be able to draw pretty good for a high school kid, but I still wouldn't call it professional level, even though, some of it got published. In terms of working seriously in comics, I self-published my first graphic novel in 2009, and I probably spent about 6 years prior to that drawing, working on that book. So I would say that in that time, I had gone through phases where I had experimented with animation for a while. I felt like even though I liked animation, that animation took more time than comics did, and I could tell the same story in a shorter amount of time. So I would say probably in the early 2000s, I sat down and started really writing, and I felt like my drawing skills, I'd gotten back into figure drawing regularly, and I started building up my chops to the point where I thought, okay, I really can make a comic. And it was no longer about trying to break into the industry. It was simply, I have a story I want to tell, comic books are my chosen medium, and that's what I want to do it in. So when I started drawing in general, I've been drawing almost all my life. That doesn't mean that if you're just starting now that it's late. It's never too late to start drawing. As long as you're making art and you're having fun and enjoying yourself, you know, just do that. You know, yes, the number of years makes a difference. 'Cause I really feel like I spent a lot of years studying not studying, just making things and not actually focusing on improving. I wasn't studying. And I'd say when I started taking figure drawing classes and when I started using art books to study from, doing master studies and looking at what information they had and doing tutorials and that sort of thing, that sort of changed up everything for me. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing that series, the art book study group on my Patreon. So I'm basically sharing my sessions where I sit down with an art book and I open it up and say, all right, this is how I try to learn the lessons that are in that book. And when I finish Walt Reed, I'll probably move on to Andrew Loomis. When I finish Andrew Loomis, I'll probably move on to George Bridgman. There was a point where I used to take George Bridgman's, where is it? Constructive Anatomy by George Bridgman. I used to take this book and I used to redraw the entire book, every drawing in here, once a year. Once a year, I would just draw the book, draw all the pages. And that was one of the things that I felt really helped my anatomy tighten up. And it's something that I've fallen out of practice with. So again, it's something I'd like to get back to, but I'm studying other art books because there's so much good information out there. We live in a time where we've got access to more information than ever in terms of artists, in terms of learning anything. So let's see here. Amara's got to go. Got to pick up a prescription, some groceries, finish doing some more work on a game level. And the first script for a new series that should be starting next year. Congratulations on breaking ground on a new project. He said, I did that self-portrait in Procreate and it was really quick. And he said, I got your other 2 books on Friday. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you enjoy them. Well, I guess on that note, we're a little over an hour here. We should wrap it up. If you too would like to get some of my books, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will take you to my Amazon author page. And if you'd like to read some of my comic books for free, you can go to news.jeremy.net, and that's GERIMI. And if you'd like to support this channel, get additional live streams, additional behind-the-scenes blog posts and artwork, you can subscribe to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. Guys, thank you so much for spending time with me. I really appreciate it. I hope that this was useful, interesting, or at least entertaining. That's it for now. Go be creative.